So good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Frassone. I'm the president of the European Alliance to Save Energy, and I would like to welcome you to this briefing co-organized with IEA on the report that was presented by the International Energy Agency on this very recently, actually, and which deals with one issue that has been under the radar of the IEA since a long time. We also, as organization, have very much enjoyed and have very much been supported by the findings and the work that the IEA has done on energy efficiency at European level and at global level. And therefore, I'm very grateful to them for wanting to spend this hour with us and with our guests. Of course, the energy efficiency has been very prominent in the conversation, even at COP28 at global level. The European Union is working on it since quite some time. We are almost never particularly enthusiastic about the results of the legislation because we think we can always go forward. But of course, the legislative framework that hopefully will come out from the Green Deal is for the European Union is quite ambitious in terms of the effects it will have. But it is always extremely important to look at that at a global level and also to understand and see what are the things, what are the tendencies that are happening at global level, which also includes the European one, and also what are the main suggestions and directions and guidelines that we all should follow. And this for us is particularly important because the agency represents an extremely credible actor in this conversation and in general in the conversation of the energy transition from whatever point of view you are considering it. And this is absolutely crucial in such a controversial question. So without further ado, I would like to thank our guests, Lucas Boele, Federico Caglioni, and Silvia Iera. And I would give the floor to Lucas Boele, which is Energy Efficiency Policy Analyst at the International Energy Agency. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Monica. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for, first of all, taking the time to attend this webinar and listen to us talk. As said, my name is Lucas Boele. I'm an Energy Efficiency Policy Analyst here at the International Energy Agency in Paris. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Federico and Silvia, who you will hear later from today as well. Today, we will walk you through our Energy Efficiency Market Report, the 2023 edition. You can see on the right-hand side here, which is our annual analysis on global developments in energy efficiency markets and policy. And we hope this report is relevant and timely, so it gives some insight in key recent trends from 2023, but also from a few years before that, and perhaps even a glimpse of the future of the coming years. We hope it allows for policy learning between countries and between policy experts. And lastly, we hope that it raises the profile of energy efficiency globally, which is, I think, something we share with the EU Alliance to Save Energy and other organizations around the table here today. Some logistical notes beforehand. Good to know that the report is freely available for download on the IEA website. We also launched a Data Explorer, where you can find much of the data underlying some of the analysis that you will see here presented today. And today we'll have around 60 minutes. In the first 20-15 minutes, we'll walk you through the main body of the report, and then we'll zoom in on some key issues for policymakers that we deemed especially relevant this year. And we'll end with a discussion where we'll have time to answer your questions to the best of our abilities. The report is structured in 5 different chapters. The first chapter is on energy intensity, demand, and price trends. Second chapter zooms in on some specific sectors, such as buildings, industry, transport. Then we'll look at employment and investment. And chapter 4, the last chapter of the main body of the report, focuses on recent policy developments, such as the EU Green deal just mentioned by Monica. And then chapter 5 is on the key issues facing policymakers this year, as I mentioned before, some of them listed here, and we'll zoom in a bit more later in this presentation. So enough introductions, let's dive right in the main body of the report with chapter 1 on energy intensity, demand and price trends, which makes us arrive at the first major conclusion of the report, which is that despite us seeing significant policy momentum on energy efficiency in 2023, we also see that energy intensity progress this year is slightly lower than in 2022, with an improvement rate of 1.3% in 2023 expected, compared to around 2% in 2022. This comes, as mentioned, at the backdrop of global momentum on energy efficiency, specifically a target to double energy efficiency progress between now and 2030, which is the level necessary, 4%, in the IEA's net zero emissions by 2050 scenario that you see on the right-hand side of the slide here. Perhaps, go back a bit. Perhaps good to briefly explain the different scenarios of the IEA that you can see on the right-hand side here. The STEPS stands for Stated Policy Scenario, which is the scenario we work with to figure out today's policy settings, what would happen in 2030. APS stands for our Announced Pledges Scenario, which is what would happen if all governments actually implemented the policies necessary to reach their announced targets. And NZE stands for Net Zero Emissions by 2050 Scenario, which is what would be necessary to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees in 2050. And as you can see, these different scenarios also entail different energy intensity futures of around 2%, 3%, and 4% per year this decade. So slightly slower global progress in 2023. The question then is, of course, why? And in the report, we explore different possible explanations, such as policy time lags. The EED recast has just been published, but the effects have not taken place yet. But also structural factors like people driving larger vehicles or living in bigger homes. But on this slide, we specifically look at regional differences. And that makes us arrive at the second major conclusion from the report, which is that slightly lower global progress hides significant regional policy progress. As we can see on the slide, for example, the United States and the European Union in 2023 posting energy intensity improvements of around 4% and 5% respectively, which is at the same level or higher than the level necessary for net zero scenario by 2050. And other regions, such as China, have slightly lower progress in 2023, although this comes historically from the fact that China has been seeing significant energy intensity improvements in the last decade of around 4% per year annually. So significant regional differences and significant policy progress. Then zooming in on Europe a bit, because this is a European audience. When we look at 2022, we can see the scale of the transformations taking place in energy efficiency landscape. Of course, largely driven in 2022 by the energy crisis. But as we can see here, all the way at the bottom, the green bar is our net zero scenario, the 4%. And in 2022, almost all European countries had energy intensity improvements higher than the level necessary for net zero, with my home country of the Netherlands posting an energy intensity improvement of around 14%, and the EU on average around 8%. So significant transformations are underway. And then lastly, but also very importantly, the last major conclusion of chapter 1 is that the energy crisis is still very much with us in 2023, which we can see by looking at retail energy prices, consumer energy bills, which remain elevated in 2023, despite in some countries prices coming down a bit compared to 2022, but in most in major European markets are still 20 to 50% higher than pre-crisis levels, indicating there are still significant cost of living pressures for households and businesses. And of course, this is just the energy prices. Prices of other goods and services might have also risen and are still causing hardships. That was a little bit on the global trends on energy intensity, demand, and price trends. And now it's time to zoom in a bit more on some specific sectors. There you go.
Thank you. So now that we've seen some general trends, we're going to dive in the key sectors, namely industry, transport, and buildings. What we see here is part of the IEA tracking clean energy progress, also known as TCEP, which I invite you to check as well after the presentation. And we analyze here different technologies to determine if they are on track with the net zero scenario targets, classifying them in 3 different colors: green, yellow, and red. Of course, the green ones are the ones that are on track. The yellow need more efforts, and the red ones are farther than the yellow ones. So we need to do extra efforts. And as we can see, globally, more efforts are needed in almost every sector, with lighting and electric vehicles being the only exceptions. Here, I'm going to introduce this graph specifically for transport in this case, but we're going to see it for each sector. So we can focus as well on the blue bars, which are we represent the European Union. And here we can see that the transport energy demand has increased in the last 12 years globally. However, in the EU, it has remained mostly constant, and we're going to see why that is happening. So one of the reasons we are keeping transport with a limited growth is because in the last 12 years, the efficiency of cars has increased more than almost 20%, as we can see on the green line, going from an index of 100 to almost 80, even though cars are getting larger or bigger, as we can see on the light blue line, where the SUVs representation of sales went from almost 20% to almost 50% right now. And on the right-hand side, we can see how the energy demand or the consumption of cars is related to their size or their weight. As we can see, a large car can consume twice the energy of a small car just to travel the same distance. However, we can also observe that for electric cars, they can be from 3 to 5 times more efficient than ICE vehicles, which masks the growth in size. So in the building sector, we can see that also global energy consumption grew, while in the European Union, it fell, also on the blue bar. And this is partly driven by ambitious policies to build more efficient buildings, but also to retrofit the existing ones. But we can see that globally, the growth is related to the population growth in emerging economies and the increased cooling needs. Here we can see that we are having increased efforts in policy making. So both in the residential sector and non-residential sector, we're having increased building costs for each 4 years. So yeah, the number of mandatory building codes that were updated between 2020 and 2023 almost reached 50 versus 2015 and 2019, where only around 30 codes were developed. In the case of industry, also industrial consumption has grew in a global level, but it has decreased in the European Union. This, of course, has to be taken into account that industrial demand depends on where the manufacturing companies are located and not only on efficiency. And we can notice that industry is the only sector in which energy demand will grow, even in the net zero scenario, while in buildings and transport, we're expecting the demand to slow down. As we can see here, we analyze the minimum energy performance standards for electric motors, which are usually used in the industry. And we see that in a global level, the MEPs are covering more than half the total energy demand in the industrial sector. and we are seeing growth in MEPs in every region in the world, even though the stringency of these MEPs vary depending on the region. On this next chapter, we're going to talk about the investment in energy efficiency technologies and processes. Here we can observe a continued growth of investment in energy efficiency that grew more than 45% from 2020 to 2023. As we can see, it reached almost $620 billion for these years. However, growth has slowed down, mostly due to increased global interest rates. And we can see that this year, compared to 2022, the investment in EVs or in the transport electrification has been a key factor for the increase in investments. Here we can see the regional investment and the tripling needs. So despite the good progress we saw on the previous slide on investment, there are several points that we need to consider. There's a very special trend happening on the investment in the energy efficiency sector. That we see that 9 out of $10 invested are taking place either in advanced economies or in China, and this is leading to a widening gap of investment compared to the emerging market and developing economies. Another issue for emerging economies is that the cost of borrowing is much higher. So the cost of capital for clean energy projects can be 2 to 3 times higher than in advanced economies or China. And we also know that in order to keep on track for the net zero scenario, we need to triple investments to 2030. And the regional differences mean that advanced economies will need to more than double their investments, while emerging and developing economies will need to more than triple their investments.
Thanks.
Now we'll go back to Lucas.
Yeah, thank you, Federico. Now we'll move to the last chapter of the main body of the report on recent policy developments. And here we'll analyze specifically 3 different groups of policy. The first one being incentives, so where does government investment flow? And then secondly, some regulation, some standards of regulating energy efficiency. And lastly, some information and behavior change campaigns, which is sort of in line with the IEA's policy packages presented earlier. On this slide, we see government spending. And what you can observe is that since 2020, governments have spent around $700 billion on energy efficiency, which is, I think, very positive. But what you can also see is that the majority of these funds, around $470 billion, comes from just 5 countries: the United States, Italy, Germany, Norway, and France. So 4 of those countries being European, which is, I guess, something that needs to be more equal in the future, and other countries need to follow these examples. Looking then at regulation, we see that across different sectors, so from space cooling to cooking to the industrial motors that Federico just showed, we see policy is ramping up. So there are more minimum energy performance standards in all different sectors. Even so that major efficiency policy announcements have now been made by countries covering over 70% of global energy demand, which is again a very positive development. Then quickly zooming in on something that was quite specific in this year and last year, the energy crisis, specifically for the European Union, is the fact that governments have spent a lot of money on energy efficiency investment, but on the other hand, they've also spent almost $900 billion on affordability spending, which is sort of shielding consumers and from higher energy prices due to the energy crisis. And as you can see on the slide, the majority of this spending was done in the European Union, where effects of the crisis hit hardest, and the majority of these funds have been non-targeted, so general support on energy bills, which gives the important consideration going forward whether that's still the most efficient way to spend government funds or there are other more efficient targeted supports, which is something member states are now talking about and discussing internally. Then lastly, moving to the information aspect, behavior change. We see in 2022 and 2023 that many countries across the world, but especially in Europe, because of the energy crisis, have started behavior campaigns or energy efficiency awareness campaigns. And it's notoriously difficult to measure the direct effects of such campaigns because there's a range of factors at play at the same time. However, what we try to do in the report is take a specific case for France, where we analyzed a cold day in winter in 2023, when the French efficiency campaign was at a peak point, and we compared that with a cold winter day in February 2019, and we see the difference in peak electricity consumption, which can be up to 6% lower in 2023 than in 2019, which is quite a big effect, indicating behavior change campaigns do have some effects, and we intend to explore this analysis further in the future. So now you've seen the main body of the report, some energy intensity, demand and price trends, some specific sectoral progress, efficient investment and employment, and some policy developments in 2023 specifically. Now we zoom in on some of the key spotlights, which is a new aspect of the energy efficiency report this year, which you can all access online as well. And the first one is on the doubling global progress for energy efficiency target that was mentioned briefly by Monica in the beginning as well. Well, what exactly is the target? It's a doubling of energy efficiency from around 2% in 2022 to around 4% between now and 2030, which is a global target. And here it still says that the target is being considered at COP, but as we now know, the target has been considered at COP with some, I think, positive outcomes. We analyzed exactly why we should double. What does it give us? First of all, it's a critical step on the path to net zero, of course, but there are more benefits, including over 7 gigatons of CO2 emission savings in 2030. Energy bills will be cut by around a third in advanced economies. It gives a lot of jobs, 4.5 million more jobs than today, and it can save a lot of energy, around twice the EU's consumption in 2022. So there are a lot of advantages of this doubling target, which is why the IEA, together with the European Commission, has led the call on this target. We also have some good news from our analysis, which is that although doubling is of course challenging, it can be done and has been done by different countries. As you can see on the slide here, in the last 10 years, almost all countries achieved the 4% target at least once, and more than half achieved it at least 3 times in the last 10 years. So the major challenge now going forward for countries is to do this continuously and sustained over a longer period of time, which is a challenge for many governments around the world. Another good news story in the report is that many of the policies necessary to reach this doubling already exist. I'm aware that this graph contains a lot of information, so definitely check it out in the report as well. But it's our new efficiency policy stringency index, which shows you the range of policies in place for specific appliances. For example, on the left you see lighting, and the blue bar shows the range of policies across different countries, and the green line is the level necessary for net zero. And as you can see, policies already exist that exceed those levels, while for other appliances such as air conditioning, minimum energy performance standards still need to be ramped up to be in line with net zero in many countries. And then lastly, the before mentioned target at COP. We see that in the COP outcomes, the tripling of renewable energy capacity is in the final statement, but also the doubling of global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030, which is, I think, a very positive development. And the IEA stands ready in the coming years to help governments achieve these targets and monitor the progress in different regions. Now let's look at our second spotlight on heating, and after that we have some on cooling, and after that we have something on heating as well. Federico.
Thank you, Lucas. 2023 is expected to be the hottest year on record, and high temperatures have caused thousands of deaths, wildfires, and disruption in several economic sectors. This has had a major impacts on people's lives, well-being, and productivity, but also on the energy system. Power grids have hit record levels of peak demand in more than 10 countries around the world, and numerous countries have experienced considerable power cuts and restrictions. Here in the graphs, we can see that the impact of higher temperatures on electricity demand is very clear. As we can observe on the left graph, every 1 degree Celsius increase in the temperature over 22 degrees in Texas causes an average increase of 4% in electricity demand, while in India, where air conditioner ownership is still lower, the same temperature increase of 1 degree still drives 2% gain in the power demand. And this is expected to keep growing as more air conditioners are installed. But the good news are that energy efficient cooling solutions are available, and they can also be found aligning with net zero goals. And our recent analysis shows that buying a high efficiency air conditioner doesn't necessarily come with higher purchase costs. For example, in Thailand, as we see in the image, consumers with a budget of $350 can opt to buy a low efficiency air conditioner of 3 watts per watt, or one that is double as efficient of 6 watts per watt, spending the same amount of money. Further purchasing the second one, the most efficient, the electricity bill can almost half, resulting in savings of up to $2,000 over the unit time. This is not exclusive to Southeast Asia or to Thailand in particular, but we are observing this in several regions where we analyze the markets. And of course, a warmer year has also an impact on heating, as the heat demand will decrease in this case. For example, Europe saw the second warmest winter on record, and as a result, homes needed to be warmed less, of course. And since gas is used in many regions to heat homes, lower heating demand also means lower natural gas demand. But the weather only explains part of this drop. Another part is due to high prices during the energy crisis, causing consumers to take emergency measures such as heating less or lowering heating less spaces or lowering the temperature. However, next to weather and affordability effects, structural changes are also happening, with more efficiency measures such as insulation and electrification being taken, supported by strong government policies. As a result, as we can see in the image, countries representing around 50% of global residential gas consumption have seen their demand either peak, stabilize, or fall as of 2021. And one of the key reasons why natural gas demand is falling is because of the introduction of heat pumps. As we can see, global sales have been growing significantly both in 2021 and 2022, particularly in Europe, but also as a global trend. In 2022, countries across Europe accounting for 80% of residential gas use in the region have plans to ban gas boilers in new or existing buildings as well. And in 2023, some governments made these plans more concrete and laid out specific dates for the bans. However, other countries delayed the announced phase-out plans amid acceptance and implementation concerns. And now we go to the...
Thanks, Federico. Now we dive into another key issue, and in fact we focus on how consumers are benefiting from systems efficiency. For this spotlight, we look in particular at how system efficiency can help consumers in manage an increase in variability on both the supply and demand side. Renewables and nuclear energy will dominate the growth of global electricity supply in the following year. And from 2010 to 2022, electricity consumption grew by almost 40%, and the share of electricity in total energy demand is growing up across all the sectors, as you can see in this chart. In the same time frame, renewable energy increased its share in overall electricity production more than 1.5 times as much. As the share of variable renewable generation increases and the scope of electrified end uses expands, huge strains will be placed on power systems. A larger share of variable renewables in electricity production, such as wind and solar, means heightened variability of supply, which must be managed properly. Certain end uses, such as air conditioning, quick cooking, and electric vehicles, tend to be used at specific times of the day or during specific seasons, leading to greater pressures from peak demand. These pressures are only heightened by the extreme weather events mentioned earlier in this presentation, which can threaten grid stability. In response to these pressures, new digitally enabled and efficient end-use technologies could increase system efficiency by not only taking the burden of grids directly by lowering the demand, such as by efficiency or load shedding measures, but it can also provide a tool for turning such pressures to consumers' advantage through increased control and demand flexibility, through load shifting and modulation measures. Flexibility, which is defined as the ability to rapidly adjust supply or demand in response to a signal such as a price, is today primarily supplied from the supply side by means of thermal, hydro, and battery solutions. However, with rising variable renewable penetration, more flexibility is needed on the demand side. In addition to electricity security, flexibility helps lowering the costs. This is because flexibility allows consumers to take advantage of low-priced electricity and preventing system operators from having to make costly network reinforcements. Time-of-use tariffs, in particular, help in encouraging flexibility. Digitally enabled demand response from buildings, industry, and transport could reduce the curtailment of renewable energy systems by more than 25% by 2030, increasing system efficiency and infrastructure utilization, thereby reducing costs for consumers as well. In 2020, 45 gigawatts of demand response was available to systems operators, and in an IEA net zero emission scenario, by 2050, demand response will need to increase more than tenfold to reach 500 gigawatts. 2023 saw positive developments on system efficiency. And in this year, in the market report, we took a look at some cases from specific regions. For example, South Australia, which has become recognized as a global leader because of its high share of variable renewable in the electricity mix. Wind and solar, in fact, contributed to more than 85% of the region's electricity demand in December 2022, and almost 40% of homes have installed rooftop solar. In order to achieve this, the region has made use of technologies such as virtual power plants and battery storage. For instance, under the new technical regulator guideline, the state has mandated that air conditioners installed after 1st July 2023 must be demand response ready. And now that we finished the overview on the report, we want to give you a quick overview as well on other IEA work on energy efficiency. In particular, last June in Versailles, we held the 8th IEA Annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency, where we achieved a very good result. In fact, 46 governments endorsed the goal of doubling global energy efficiency progress by 2030. And as Lucas previously said, doubling target has been included in COP28 outcomes. So it's a very good starting point, which highly resonates with our analysis. And looking forward to 2024, the next global conference, or the 9th edition, will be in Kenya, in Nairobi, from 21st to 23rd of May. Thank you so much for the attention. And now we are happy to receive your questions or comments. But as you can see here, you can find our contact details. So in case you have questions later on and you want to share with us best practices, we are very happy if you reach out to us. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed for this not only very interesting, but for once quite positive, I would say, report, in the sense that there are parts that are more encouraging than others, than other issues, than other reports that we saw. So I would like to know if there are some questions coming from the audience. You can also write it down if you want, and we will read them. And if not, I have some questions myself. Ileana, do you see any questions from the audience?
No.
Anybody wants to raise their hand? Yeah, there is one. Progress in energy intensity and the transport sector from Isabel Escobar. So progress in energy intensity in the transport sector seems to be lagging the furthest behind. Electric cars are clearly a solution for road transport, but there are still trains and aviation. How can this be advanced to be at least on track by 2030? Who wants to answer?
I think I'll kick off, but happy for Silvia and Federico to jump in as well. Thank you for the question. I think it's an excellent question. And it is indeed interesting to look at transport specifically. And I think what we see is that actually a lot of progress is happening in the transport sector, specifically because of electric vehicle sales. So in one of the slides Federico showed on tracking clean energy progress, we see that electric vehicles are one of the few technologies that are on a sort of green light, so are doing well. We see sales in electric vehicles ramping up rapidly as well. So I think indeed on road transport, the transition is happening quite quickly. Then, of course, in the question, it also talks about trains and aviation. And I think indeed, one of the important things is to see how the modal shift from cars to trains or from aviation to trains can be encouraged. I think one of the things that governments can focus on is, of course, investments in infrastructure to enable this. For example, the high-speed railways in Europe, for example, that are now being ramped up in many countries would help. And I think there are many campaigns now as well encouraging that behavior change. So I think there's still stuff to happen in the transport sector, but we do see positive developments ramping up there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another question from Zoe Ricci. She asks if how we can ensure that countries facing several challenges such as conflicts, political instability are complying with the EU targets, and also how can we ensure that investments are going in the right way towards achieving an energy efficiency. And here I would like myself to add a little, note, and that you were talking about renewables and nuclear. I just want to underline the fact that in 2022, we had more than 200 gigawatt installed in solar, 77 in wind, and minus 11 in nuclear. So to think that it will be mostly with nuclear, I have my serious doubts in terms of perspective, and also in terms of, as Zoe was asking, the right way to go and investing, because accelerating renewables and efficiency is probably more effective in the next few years than other kind of investment. This is, of course, my own take. It's just a comment to what Silvia was saying earlier. Who wants to answer?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent comment to add as well. And perhaps looking at the question first on how to ensure that countries facing several challenges are complying with EU targets. I think in the first place, it's not the IEA's role to ensure that countries comply with EU targets. That's something for the European Commission. And of course, organizations like the ones of yourself can encourage countries to do so. However, I do think the IEA can play an important role in helping countries achieve those goals. And I think that's also something we're trying to do by giving advice to different governments, also governments in challenging situations. I don't know if your question is specifically referring to Ukraine, but perhaps to take that as an example, the IEA is working with the Ukrainian government to build back energy efficient buildings. Because of course a lot has happened in the country, but one thing that the IEA can do is provide advice on how to build back with efficiency in mind. So I think that might help. And then the second part of your question was how to ensure that investments are going in the right way towards achieving energy efficiency. And I think there the IEA also has a role in showing that it pays off. So there are significant benefits in investing in energy efficiency, either be it the payback times of many of those different investments or the multiple benefits on health impacts and other impacts as well. And we can help governments measure those effects, monitor those effects, and then have a better argument on why investment in energy efficiency is beneficial. I think that's something that we'll continue to do in 2024 as well with our work here.
Okay. Are there other questions that yes, Luigi?
Yes. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Luca and colleagues for the presentation. My question is about the indicator. So can you please elaborate, explain a little bit better this the energy intensity indicator on which is all the study it is based, so that how the nature of this indicator, how it works? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question, Luigi. Energy intensity, as featured in the report, is the fraction between total energy supply, TES, over gross domestic product, GDP. So it's a ratio between those two, meaning that, for example, in 2023, we expect energy intensity to slow to 1.3%. Well, that is driven by the fact that, for example, energy demand, so total energy supply, is increasing by 1.7% this year. So because the consumption of energy is going up, we see that energy intensity progress might be slower than before. So it's a combination of those two factors.
I also have a question, but please, I see a lot of colleagues and very energetic, let's say, participants to this event. So I would like really to encourage them to come in also with comments and with questions. I'd like to ask you, the use of maps is becoming, I wouldn't say completely, mainstream, but it is becoming more common in Europe and in the United States. I would like to know from your perspective if these instruments are working at if you can say this, and MAPS is the minimum energy performance standards, and if you have kind of reflection that you did on this kind of instruments. And also I saw that it was very impressive, or amazing, this slide that you showed about the amount of resources spent on energy efficiency in just 5 countries. I was really, it's quite concentrated, let's say. Did you have any kind of consideration about the impact of all that money invested?
I will take the first one regarding maps. So of course we are tracking the progress of maps across the whole world and across different appliances and uses. Lately we have worked on appliances in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we can clearly see that countries that are implementing maps have overall a higher energy efficiency or higher energy efficient products that don't apply maps. So of course we, for example, in the case of Latin American countries, we can see that the average efficiency of appliances such as refrigerators is overall 10 years behind that one in the European Union. So yeah, the answer is, the simple answer is that maps work, and we need to encourage more countries to implement them. And I think Lucas will take the second one.
Very nice catchphrase. Maps work and more countries should do them. That's I'm going to write that down. I think your second question was regarding the government investment, and that only 5 countries are responsible for the majority, and how we measure the impacts, right? I think
Yes.
We do try to measure the impacts of those policy packages. Of course, as mentioned, the fact that money might be announced from a government doesn't mean that the effects are immediately there. Good examples being the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which is, of course, a huge amount of money that is committed to energy efficiency, at least plays a big role in that. But it doesn't mean that we see the results immediately. However, I do think that some indications are good to track. For example, the sales of electric vehicles, both in sales of new vehicles and how the stock turnover is happening, but also in other sectors such as heat pumps, we can see sales going up, which are subsidized by many governments. So I think we try to measure the effects, but many of the investments that happened this year still have to take some time in order to observe their full effect. But yeah, that's part of our work is also observing those effects. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that from those 5 countries, we I think monitored that around I think it was around 470 billion that they invested, the 5 of them together, and 300 of that 470 billion, so quite a big majority, was spent on transport. So that also refers back to the earlier question, which is largely electric vehicles, of course. But I think you can see that, yeah, transport happening a lot.
Thank you. I just check if there is any other raised hand. Yeah, Luigi.
Yeah. I have another question, which is related to the figure. If I noted correctly, I think, Luca, you say that in the European Union we had like a 5% in 2023. We had a 5% energy intensity improvement, if that is correct. So I was wondering, from your data, can you say or can you define if this improvement was more due to the legislation in place that we have in the European Union, or to the this unprecedented investments, level of investments that actually was also outlined in that figure, with some countries, France, Italy, investing like such a huge amount of money in energy efficiency? Is it possible to find this out from your data?
I think that's the $1 million question, Luigi. So I think you're actually spot on what we ask ourselves as well. I think it's good to note that the 5% intensity improvement in 2023 in the European Union is quite preliminary data, and it's quite unique for the IEA, for the first time that we're releasing figures on 2023 already in 2023. So I think the next step, as you mentioned now, is to see what is behind these changes. And I think, as you mentioned, part of it is legislation in place, part of it is investment from governments, which we definitely see ramping up. But of course, there are also still the remaining price effects for both households and consumers that play a role. And of course, the weather effects should not be discounted. For example, last year, of course, gas consumption decreased a lot during the winter in the European Union, but around, I think, 40% in the residential sector was then driven by weather-related factors. So I think the next step for us is to disentangle those different factors and see what's behind the change. But in the report, we have some initial thoughts about policy developments happening, but we don't have specific attributions yet to what percentage is due to what, just because the figures are too recent for that.
I have a figure that I can share with you, 2022, in which we analyze. It might be a bit complex to go through it now, but we analyze the relationship between the intensity improvement, the temperature changes, so the warmer winter, and the increase in energy prices, and we can see a big correlation between temperatures and intensity improvement, and we can also see that some countries where prices went up higher had better or higher improvements as well, such as the case of the Netherlands in 2022.
Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe I take the. I don't see if there are other colleagues who want to take the
there
floor.
is another
Monica.
question.
Okay, sorry.
So,
I'll come in.
I even have two questions. So since we are coming to the last 7 minutes, I will take them both together. The targets of reducing energy consumption and encouraging the use of renewables are clear evolution that will lead to a more sustainable world. However, there are unforeseen events and crises. To what extent are energy efficiency targets resilient to such crises? Also another $1 million question. And the second question from Zoe, will there be any strategy to foster the deployment of more energy efficient technologies among private consumers and citizens? We can see that some EU countries are starting to decrease incentives, make it more difficult to financially empower citizens to purchase new technologies. And will there be any proposal on your side to move forward?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Indeed, great questions again. Thank you, Iliana and Diana and Zoe. I guess the first question regarding to what extent do energy efficiency targets are resilient to future crises and geopolitical conflicts. I guess the easy answer is that the targets are very resilient. What governments actually do depends on the crisis at the moment. And of course, we at the IEA also can't predict what crisis will happen in the future and the effects on energy efficiency. However, I do think, as mentioned before, that we have an important role to advise governments that if a crisis happens, what the best response might be in terms of energy efficiency. I know that happened during the COVID crisis. I know that happened during the energy crisis in 2022, and I know that happened during the Ukraine crisis. And every time the IEA has responded with recommendations and advice on how to build back in an efficient way. And I think that's something that we'll keep doing. But I don't dare to speculate on what exactly the effects will be of future potential crisis on energy efficiency targets. But as long as we continue to provide good advice and as you guys continue to advocate for energy efficiency, because I think we all share that it's worth it, it can help during crisis. And I don't know if it can completely solve it. Then regarding will there be other strategies to foster deployment of more efficient technologies in private consumers and citizens? Yes. I think there definitely will be. And I think specifically, I see your question is also, okay, some countries are decreasing their incentives. I think, for example, in Europe, which is a positive development that I know you guys have advocated for as well, is that part of the new energy efficiency directive is that countries specifically have to address citizens suffering from energy poverty. So there has to be specific policy in place to tackle energy poverty, energy efficiency in those households. So I think that's a definite clear target that will incentivize countries to address those topics. I think from the IEA's perspective, this is definitely something that's on our radar as well. Before I mentioned that we'll look into the multiple benefits and the social impacts of energy efficiency. I think one of the things that we're now also looking at is what are the distributional outcomes of certain energy policies. So which consumers benefit and which consumers benefit more than others, which can inform governments to either adapt their policies according to their political needs or continue on the right path if they are going on the right path. So I think we will analyze in the coming months and years the distributional aspect and the social impacts to see how is it affecting citizens and is it going in the right direction or is it going in the wrong direction. I don't know if it completely answers your question, but if one of you wants to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that considering the strategies to foster the deployment on energy efficient technologies from the IEA, we also promote the implementation of policy packages, which is not just considering where the investment goes, but implementing different kinds of regulations and information measures so that users can make the right decisions as well and decide where actually their money goes.
Thank you very much indeed. I wonder if either of you three want to make some kind of concluding remark before we close.
I think in general, just thank you all for the attention and your time this morning. Thank you for the work you're doing on energy efficiency in Europe. I think it's excellent work. And thank you to Iliana, Monica, and colleagues for inviting us and allowing us to give this presentation. We think it's relevant work, and we hope you share the conclusion. And looking forward to working with you guys in the future on this important topic.
Thank you very much. I think we all share the view that this was not only useful, but very important, because I would say that we need as many data as possible, also outside the EU. And we need very much, above all in this very difficult political and times in general, encouragement from the numbers and from the reality, to see that we are on the right track, but not enough yet. And that we need to accelerate, and we need to be even more convincing, because I believe that this question of convincing not only policymakers, but also media and public opinion is certainly the biggest challenge we face as a sector that is pushing for energy efficiency, for reducing our energy needs in all sectors. So thank you very much once again, and I would like to take the occasion to wish you all the best for Christmas, but above all for a very challenging 2024. Thank you very much, and talk to you very soon. Ciao.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.